Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network, and we are recording this one on a Friday. Of course, a big report day or small report day, depending on how you look at it. But we do have a cattle and feed report that'll come out later on in the trading session. But more importantly, what is the next feed pail to drop? We watch these markets, especially on a Friday, and the obvious trade that we see to the negative. We're going to dive into what's been some of the factors that we've looked at over the past couple of weeks. Unfortunately, a lot of negativity that's been weighing in on that trade. But the big question is, how bullish is this trade going to get? We've got a lot to talk about today as Brad Kooima joins us. He is with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's start there. These last 3 Fridays, it's definitely been a struggle on this trade action.
Right. For sure, Susan. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for working with adjusting in my schedule a little bit. And I think that's a great place to start on a Friday because the last few here have been problematic. And it's because, the market is worried less about necessarily cattle fundamentals, but more about outside market influences. The first couple, maybe 3, were worried about, well, is there going to be some new news relative to the bird flu story? And, it seemed like all that bad news has a tendency to happen over the weekend, or you're worried that it might. And then, of course, last week, the trade was obviously, rightly so, clearly worried about the escalating tensions in the Middle East between Iran and Israel. So here we are to another Friday, wondering, whether the long speculator has the guts to stay long for a weekend is basically the upshot of the deal, to put it in real simple terms. And then on top of it, you have a cattle and feed report, which we've had a little pattern here lately. If no one's noticed that these reports have had a tendency to be bearish, disappointing compared to guesses. So yeah, it's one of those days where we need a long speculator, right? Unless you like markets that go down every day, which who would like that, right? So let's see how the market handles itself. In terms of the Middle East thing, stock market is, well, now it's just a tad lower, but it was sharply lower. I'm looking at S&P futures overnight, and then it's actually at different times this morning been a little bit higher. So it seems like that financial side of the markets here have so far handling, that news of that bombing pretty well. And the cattle futures, I don't know, June down 27, feeder cattle up a little bit. I'd say not so bad so far, but yeah, it's only 9:15.
And I found it interesting that the ag secretary out of Texas came out and said, okay, we've gone 3 weeks now without any new HPAI. So he feels like this market in general should have moved beyond this and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment, Susan. Thanks for throwing that in there. Because I agree, to a degree, I suppose maybe the news was taken over by some of the Middle East talk, but you're right. It does seem as though there's finally some containment to this worrying, fretting, a little better, I think, articulation out of USDA and others, about how the safety issue is, we're fine. We're doing a good job of making sure that this doesn't, get anywhere where we don't want it to be. And even some of these stories about how long bird flu's been around, my goodness, a long time, 150 years. Yeah. So, anyway, but yes, let's get that back in our rearview mirror someplace, and hopefully we don't have something else again to worry about, because we are taking our market slowly into a spot here where a guy that I had immense respect for in trading, one of my favorite sayings that I have wrote down on a Post-it note right there, the beginning and the end of all markets start in Iowa. Talking about cattle market. And I think in Iowa, the numbers are short. And I think we are very current. And as we move here into this better demand period, I don't know, it feels to me like, kind of like that heavyweight boxer. He's taking some punches here, but he hasn't fallen down. And so I'm kind of excited to see what this market might be doing here in the next, even in the next couple of weeks, but even down the road here as we get into, we really haven't got to the tight numbers yet, Susan. I mean,
right.
All those placements of last fall, remember that? We placed every heifer. We got record heifer kill year to date for the year. The heifers are on feed. We got to work through that. But at some point, that's going to change, even though they're not going to tell us about it on the July report, which just really frosts my rear end that they're taking that away.
I was waiting to ask you about that.
Yeah, well, let's not have transparency after all. I mean, what the world? I mean, the way they spend money like Skittles, that they're going to say that there's a budget cut. What are you talking about, budget cut? They even kick the can down the road on the farm bill. There ain't no budget cuts. They're doing the same thing as last year. Hey, it just torques me off, as you can tell. I mean, I think that some of us, that still care enough about the numbers and we'll dig and I think we'll probably have a decent idea of whether heifer retention has started or not. But why not have transparency? You don't think the large commercials got entire buildings of people that are doing research for stuff like this? Of course they do. It's very frustrating to me. One time before this has happened, they threatened to do this and then they brought it back. I can tell you that there are some industry groups that are very upset, including the NCBA, including ICA, including U.S. Cattlemen, even Farm Bureau. So let's see. It's a long way until the July report. Maybe we can get them to collectively think straighter here. But
well, thinking on a positive note, I mean, we're mid-April, which means May is just around the corner. The grills have been dusted off because, fingers crossed, we don't have any snow or cold wet weather that slows down the grilling. But does that mean some firming to our box beef coming up?
Yes. And, you can almost, write it in the rock that you get the 3 weeks ahead of Mother's Day and you get a turn in the middles, right? In the high price cuts, especially the New York strips. So yeah, I get asked and I try to do my best to look at, some nuance that demand has changed or is different. Exports have, combination of what the dollar's done and high prices generally, exports have been down. They were a little better this week, but no runaway. But in terms of what domestic demand looks like, I mean, yeah, we've got kind of a high price product, although it's finally priced back about at or below last year and at a perfect time going into the time when we're going to use the most of it. I think, notwithstanding we somehow all of a sudden really tip over the stock market or, develop some sort of a mindset toward recession, I would doubt it given the timetable of the election. I would guess that they will try to make this look as good as possible until November, they being the media. So I think demand's all right. And when these numbers get tight again for real, somebody's going to lose ground and it's the Packers' turn. It's his turn. The feeder has lost money plenty of times. It's his turn. That's a function of a tight market.
As we wrap this up, you mentioned the word before we started this program. You might be leaning a little bullish.
Well, for kicks here, I've kind of decided to enough of this being in the bear cave here for a little while, worried about the weights. That still does bother me. That the weights are as high as they are. I think that's going to change because I think here you're through the yearlings and get into this calf thing and the weights are going to drop a lot. So I've been allowing myself a little bit to think about, okay, where and when. Okay. So I'm guessing, okay, disclaimer, right? But I could see a way where, I keep telling people, really the tight numbers don't start until a year from now or so. Could February cattle go over 200? I think they could go way over 200, to be honest with you. I can give you a whole list of markets that have had these moonshot type things. Hogs tripled in price from the COVID low. If we tripled in price, we go to 230. Cocoa, orange juice. I mean, there's a whole list of this stuff that, how about crude oil goes from negative to 85, right? So when we really get smacked right in the forehead with just how tight these numbers are going to get here in a while, then we'll see where the rubber meets the road. Obviously, there's always risk. There's always something else that, is not a supply side factor that can make a difference. But I'm excited to see the next year and a half or so what's going to happen.
No kidding. Well, thanks for joining us this week. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Well, check us out on kkbtrading.com, or we still do use telephones around here, 712-722-0023.
All right, Brad Kooima has been joining us for this week's Cattle Call. Quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's this week's Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.